lots of leaders approach new ideas with this attitude of immediately trying to think of why something won't work. Their immediate response is no or yes, but, which of course means exactly the same thing as no. And as a result, after a while, their team stops proposing new ideas. Why? Because they've been killing their team's egos, right? By immediately shooting down any possible idea. Their working assumption is if I am a manager, my job is only to figure out why things won't work, rather than flip it and go, well, what if?
Some experts chase attention, but the smart ones build authority. You're listening to the Authority on Demand podcast, where credibility becomes your competitive advantage. Every week, we're pulling back the curtain on how founders and leaders turn expertise into inbound demand through books that position, media that converse, and strategies that actually move the needle. I'm Danielle Hutchinson, your host and Chief Creative Officer at Authority on Demand. Now, let's turn your authority into leverage. So, when was the last time you ever felt truly energized and flow at work? If you're coming up short, our next guest is here to help. Adam Kingl is on a mission to bring more creativity, adaptability, and humanity to the workplace by integrating insights from the arts. Through his diverse background in theater, business, and academia, Adam has developed a unique approach to transforming organizations. His new book, Sparkling Success, draws powerful lessons from the practices of jazz musicians, theater directors, chefs, and more to give leaders a new toolbox for innovation. So keep listening to discover what the business world could learn from the art studio. Adam, welcome to our show.
Hi, thanks very much for having me. Appreciate that.
Hey, real quick before we jump back in, if you're loving what we're doing here, hit that subscribe button and drop us a like. We're bringing you the best authors, the most real conversations, and all the writing wisdom that you didn't know you needed. So stick around because it only gets better from here. All right, now let's get back to the conversation. Of course. Yeah, I'm very excited for this one because I always love to hear when authors take their own life experiences and turn it into actionable insights for other people. So I think we have a lot to unpack here. But starting off with you and your life, I mean, what sparked your interest in exploring, business and the arts? I mean, you have a ton of stuff in the background, but was there a certain moment in the theater and business that influenced your thinking in particular?
Well, there wasn't a single moment whereby I said, "Oh, I have to write a book which combines the arts and business." It very much is kind of almost a semi-autobiographical work in terms of the influences in my life. So clearly, right now, I teach and write for business audience, but my original career was in the arts. I was a theater director. I directed an improv group. I did voiceovers. I lived in Los Angeles, but I've lived in London now for the last 26 years. And in that gradual evolution of my career into academia, I've always been fascinated in how innovation and creativity is practiced in an organizational environment. And I guess what happened was, and this is probably going back about 20 years, I thought surely there are things that I was doing in the art that you could apply to enhance your and your team's creative capacity in a corporate or a nonprofit or any organizational environment. So what are those habits that I used or that I observed other people using, and can you apply that? Can you extrapolate those and use those in a different environment? And so that's what I was noodling with, and that just kind of marinated in my brain for quite a few years before I finally decided, okay, it's time to sort of, in a way, this book is me saying this is my story, and just trying to get it all out there. And so finally, about 4 years ago, I finally embarked on getting that book done.
Understood. So that's really cool that you kind of sat on it for a while, you thought about it, and then you were like, okay, it's time to get it on the paper, time to share it with others. And yeah, I mean, it's great that it kind of reflects everything that you've done in your life and that you believe. I mean, for instance, I saw that your book argues that we need a new renaissance in business. So what
Right?
does that mean, and what does it look like to embrace that philosophy?
Yeah,
I'm sure that's something that you embody yourself.
that's a very important theme, and I'm glad you identified that. Actually, the working title of the book, through the whole time that I was writing it, was actually called A New Renaissance. That was originally going to be the title of the book, and then my editor once he got a hold of it, said, "You know what? I've got a new title for the book, Sparking Success." So that's what it became. But I still was able to squeeze in the metaphor of the Renaissance. And the point I was making about the Renaissance is I think that was the last time in at least Western history where there was a flowering of both arts and commerce at the same time. And I
Mhm.
think it had to do with similar reasons that both estates, societal estates, were being honored, financed, brought together, and there's kind of these rich mixes, these rich synergies. I think there's no doubt that, for example, the Medici family in Florence, right, were sponsors of Da Vinci and Galileo, and of course founded the Medici Bank, which still stands. And it's that sort of honoring and combining of the different functions of society, which are kind of a metaphor for the different functions of ourselves, of our minds, of our humanity, that I think meant that the Renaissance was an era of human history that we still celebrate today. So I guess the point is we know that when you have diversity in a team, for example, you almost inevitably enhance its creativity. No organizational behavioral psychologist would argue otherwise, right? Creativity increases with diversity and decreases with sameness. There is no, peer-reviewed journal article that I have ever encountered that would say the opposite. And the Renaissance was just this writ large on a macro level. In this case, it was diversity of thought and influence. And I think that that's a very simple and profound lesson for how we can enhance creativity.
Understood. Well, that's very insightful to think about, and kind of just goes beyond like the standard. Like we need diversity in the workplace, or more so like this is why it gives us creativity and makes people kind of shift their mindsets. Um, so that being said, I mean, let's transition into that area of thinking. What's one key mind shift that you think is critical for business leaders to start moving their organizations and make it more creative and more adaptive? I mean, what are the steps that you would recommend?
Well, there are definitely lots of techniques and tips. And the good thing is they don't have to be all combined, nor are they mutually exclusive. So readers could pick up one thing and use that. They could try to apply three things, either all at once or consecutively, and it doesn't really matter because any of these techniques would be a step forward in the right direction. But I think probably the biggest obstacle that I encountered in looking at organizations that have been either on creative journeys or have found their creative journeys stymied was really their attitude toward failure. And failure is a very charged word. It almost like indicates, well, if you're doing something artistic, of course you're free to fail. But when we're working in a corporate environment and we have profit targets and we have shareholders to please, failure is anathema.
Mm.
That's not precisely true, not in the way that I'm defining it. Failure in the way I'm defining it is you have to be able to propose, conceive, and evaluate new ideas without fear. Now, that doesn't mean you're going to execute every possible idea that's posed in an organization or in a team. But at the same time, unless you are fearlessly looking at ideas and big ideas, then you're never going to hit kind of the next big supernova idea. Any innovation or improvement in your organization, if you don't do that, is going to be marginal, incremental, and is only going to represent a tiny extrapolation of the past of what you're already doing. So when I looked at jazz artists and improv artists and writers and TV directors and producers and music conductors, what they all sort of said is you have to at least pose big challenging ideas and give it the safe space in which you can discuss. Because every now and then you're going to turn around and go, wait a minute, there's something there. But lots of leaders approach new ideas with this attitude of immediately trying to think of why something won't work. Their immediate response is no, or yes, but, which of course means exactly the same thing as no. um, and as a result, then after a while, their team stops proposing new ideas. Why? Because they've been killing their team's egos, right? By immediately shooting down any possible idea. Their working assumption is if I am a manager, my job is only to figure out why things won't work, rather than flip it and go, well, what if? what if that could, can we just at least discuss the idea for 30 seconds or a minute instead of immediately killing it? Because then those people come to me and they say, oh, my team, they're not creative. They never pose ideas. So there's no point in having this innovation conversation. But then when I do a little digging, I discover, no, actually, it's sort of the manager's fault because they have been disincentivizing even the proposal of new ideas throughout their careers. So they're more at fault here because they're responsible for the environment of the team, whether it's creative or not. You ultimately have to look at the environments the leader has created.
Understood. Well, thank you for giving this that overview there. And I'm sure the book itself goes into just much more detail about each of those aspects that you mentioned. So it's, very clear that you've thought through all of this and laid it out in a way that the readers can really immerse yourselves in that mindset. So that being said, though, I would love to transition into the writing process itself a little bit. I mean,
Mhm.
what does your writing routine look like? I believe, if not mistaken, you ended up interviewing a lot of people. You drew lessons from many different fields. So what was that process like for gathering the information?
I'm now writing my third book. Sparking
Okay.
Success is my second book. And the funny thing is, actually, each book was different in terms of the writing process. So I think it's safe to say I don't have sort of the Adam Kingl writing, method down pat. It seems it's evolved with each book. Maybe that has to do with the topic of all three books are very different rather than simply, exploring different lenses of the same idea. And because they come from different fields and different topics, I think I found that my approach to how to do the work has varied considerably. I find that personally exciting. I'm sure lots of authors would say, I just want to find my process and do that. And I can't necessarily say that I proactively engineered this, but looking back, I think I've sort of tried to cater the process for each book to the needs of the book itself, trying to sort of ask in the book, what do you need from me in order to produce you? Because the answer that I got back was a little bit different each time. But just focusing on sparking success, since that's what we've been discussing, you're absolutely right. It was, I guess, what you could broadly call anthropological research. So it was interviewing lots of creative leaders. I think I had a couple of criteria. People who worked in the creative arts, who were leaders, and who were highly successful in their respective fields. And specifically, I wanted to identify universal traits that they had so that, as I mentioned, I could extrapolate those and say, look, these are universal. You could apply these in any industry, in any function. I didn't want any reader to go, well, that's all fine and good in an arts organization, but it won't work in my bank, for example. So I wanted to specifically look for human traits, how they conduct conversations, how they lead conversations, how they brainstorm, how they incentivize their people, management processes and leadership habits, even down to like what vocabulary they use. So I interviewed a lot of those people and I observed them. So whenever possible, I asked, look, could I just, follow you? Could I shadow you for a day, 2 days, or even a meeting? And even when they lived miles or, far, far, far away, I said, could you film a meeting, and then send it to me? Sometimes I had to do that because, my frequent flyer miles only go so far. Um, and then at the same time, what I also try to do is find so-called traditional companies in traditional industries that were doing the same thing. Because I also wanted the reader to say, well, could you give me at least a few examples of so-called traditional companies that are doing these things so that I have a little more confidence that I could do it in my organization. But the process was the same, interview and observation.
Understood. So I like that. And it's good that you're kind of like feeling out what works best for you. I think a lot of authors have to do the same thing. And that's something they can learn from by seeing that, hey, even this guy who's written like 3 books by now, he's still kind of figuring out what the best process is. Well, we're all in the same boat. Some things work for others and, and for others it doesn't, so you have to figure out what's best for you.
Yeah. I,
Um,
I definitely agree with that. I think every person's process they've got to find their own process. I can't by any means advocate that what worked for me is 100% going to work for someone else.
Understood. I mean, that being said, would you say that there was anything that was very challenging about writing one of either of your books, like specifically Sparking Success? But I mean, were there any creative blocks you had to work through? Anything that was, more challenging than others?
I found Sparking Success easier than my first book, Next Generation Leadership. And I think part of it is that the research methodology for Next Generation Leadership was much more sort of academic. So I was reading the literature in that case, it was intergenerational collaboration, managing across generations, et cetera. Uh, and and so that was tougher. But then there was something just personally in my life that made that tougher, and that was I was working a full-time job while I was writing that book. So I had to do it on weekends, holidays, which then of course didn't become weekends and didn't become holidays for a year. Effectively, I gave up a year's worth of leisure time to produce that book. Since then, I've become an adjunct faculty at a few institutions, and that basically means my time is more controllable and is more my own. So therefore, I was able to incorporate it if in my time. I said, look, I think 25% of my time in writing Sparking Success in 25% of my year would be writing Sparking Success. So I had the time marked, which also then gave me time for weekends, holidays, etc. I guess the other maybe thing I had to grapple with is because it wasn't based on summarizing or integrating the literature on innovation. I've read a lot of that, and I think it comes up, but because that particular research methodology was going to be more anthropological,
Mhm.
would it still feel rigorous at the end? But of course, when I spoke to a lot of my academic colleagues, they say, look, particularly in the field of organizational behavior, lots of books out there are based on observation and anthropological research. So there's nothing wrong with that. And of course, we know that stories are sticky. We remember stories, and Sparking Success by nature, by the definition of how I research the book, is filled with stories. So that gave me some confidence that that would be okay.
Understood. So yeah, I guess the main thing then is just finding like the right time and the right schedule. That's kind of like the main point of what you were saying is figuring out how to fit it all into it, and then everything else kind of comes after. So I appreciate you sharing that,
Yeah.
Rebecca, because that's a big struggle a lot of people face. And I guess at the end of the day, you have to just schedule it in and make it work around whatever it is that is going on in your life. I'm glad that things seem
Yeah.
to be moving smoother now, though.
It did, yeah, it definitely got smoother. And actually, I found even that then evolved as a result. So with next generation leadership, it was absolutely had to carve out the time because I knew I had a very finite amount of time. So when I carved out, say, 4 hours to write, I had to write. I had to produce a few hundred words in those 4 hours. Otherwise, I was digging a hole. With Spark and Success, because I had that more kind of self-engineered schedule, and also sometimes the order in which I would do things in a given day was also more under my control, unless I was teaching a class or something like that.
Right.
Um, I also had a different approach in that I said, if I was like sort of inspired to write a given idea in a given moment, I would sit down and write it. And if the next day I thought I was going to sit down and write at 9 a.m., but I really didn't have any ideas percolating in my mind, I wasn't so inspired, I had permission, I gave myself permission to not write or to just doodle or to kind of auto write and see if anything would come. But in other words, I didn't, it was more free and less forced with Sparking Success. And I also found that it wasn't linear. So, on Tuesday, I might be writing something for chapter 3. On Wednesday, I have an idea that might work in chapter 9. So I would just write that. And so the book would be assembled in that kind of piecemeal way. And it was only near the end of the process, as I would read all those pieces that were in the right order, I would then have to obviously fill in the blanks that inevitably occurred from the different pocket that I had written along the way. So I guess that just enforces the theme of different book, different method.
Yeah, I like that, and that's kind of a continuous thing, like, you gotta figure out whatever works for the right topic and the right book and the right time of your life too.
Mm.
So all of that's, very profound and it makes sense. That being said, though, it sounds to me like you're not quite done with all these projects. There's gotta be something else kind of brewing in your mind. So what's next for you? What's, on the agenda in the coming years?
So this is also going to be very, very different again.
Okay.
Um, so I have my hobby, or one of my hobbies, is cooking. So I've always loved cooking since I was small. I live in London, so we have small kind of flats typically that we live in. So there's not a lot of room to collect things, but I collect one thing that I allow myself, and that's cookbooks.
Okay.
When I was in grad school, I went to culinary school briefly for a summer, and I worked in a restaurant in order to pay my tuition for grad school. So I also kind of know how to, at least as I'm a trained home cook. I wouldn't say I'm a professional chef, but I know how to cook. Um, and one of the institutions that I work with is Imperial College London. And I was having a conversation with a fellow faculty member there who works in the chemistry department named Dr. Jakub Radzikowski. He went to Le Cordon Bleu. He worked in Michelin star kitchens, and we got talking as foodies do. And we realized that when we have been teaching executive education, so non-degree, kind of more of a further adult education, that a lot of executives that we've been working with have been saying, wellness, nutrition was a big issue for them, sustained energy, mood boost, etc. And didn't really hadn't thought consider about what to put in their body in order to help those things. There are lots of books on kind of executive wellness, but they deal more with like sleep and exercise and work-life balance and mindfulness and things like that. We had never seen a cookbook for a business reader, that's specifically for you. So he and I, over the last year, have been writing that, and it's called Executive Eat, the Cookbook for a Better Working Life. We actually submitted the manuscript to our publisher on Friday, this last Friday,
Okay.
and it's due out early June of next year. So again, totally different process, totally different topic. And first time I worked with a co-author, um, and we I found the process really fun and energizing to have a partner in crime.
Understood. So that's really exciting. That's coming out so soon also. So that's really a great way to kind of promote it now. And it's definitely a different realm to get into, like you said, going from, the book you have here, Sparking Success, to that. I mean, it's great though that you have such a breadth of knowledge. You know what I mean? It goes from, your career in the arts to that to that. So it just shows how well versed you are. And it's something all authors can learn from, because why not dabble in other genres and other fields? So
Well,
amazing.
you're being very kind. I was sort of talking to another academic colleague. I said, "Well, I guess I'm a kind of a dabbler in many things and master of none." And
Uh,
he said, "No, actually, you're being a Renaissance person."
oh, going right back to
He had
Renaissance.
and he hadn't read Sparking Success, so he made that connection. But I thought about it, I was like, actually, you're
That's
right. I guess
hilarious.
I am trying to take my own lesson here and kind of live a Renaissance life.
Understood. Yeah, no, that's hilarious that he thought about that in the beginning, and a great way to come full circle on the conversation too. There we go, the Renaissance.
Yeah, exactly.
So I guess I have to ask, as we start to wrap up here today, what do you hope that the readers, especially business leaders, take away from your books? What impact do you hope that it has?
Well, I guess one thing they all have in common is help us to lead a more human life. So my reader the common thread in all three books is the reader is a business audience. Whether, a beginning in one's career or a very senior executive, nearing retirement, regardless. And I want them to think about um, leading a working life that is more livable, that is more filled with humanity on a daily basis. We still are unfortunately kind of we're under the tyranny of Taylorism, right? Frederick Winslow Taylor, the father of scientific management, who 150 years ago wrote about how to manage people, but he was writing for the Industrial Revolution when human beings basically needed to be machines, robots. But we have robots now, so we don't need workers to be robots. We need our people to be humans, to be filled with creativity and initiative, and challenge, and all the things that we value most. If you think about all the companies that we kind of celebrate the most anywhere in the world, they are filled with innovation and initiative and humanity. So I think all of my books have kind of that in common. And whether it's one lens or a different lens, that's what I hope the readers will take away to realize my working life can actually be a little bit more livable.
Understood. Yeah, I love that. And that's really a prime way to end the conversation to think about what we can do moving forward. One last thing though, how about the writers listening today? Any last writing tips that you wish to carry on with them after this episode ends? What do you think they should be learning from this conversation?
I guess part of it, my own journey, at least taught me, is, don't immediately get married to a particular writing process.
Okay.
Try a few different things, see what works for you, right? Don't sort of just listen to the likes of me or any author or read any book on writing. Okay, I will just do that. And I will kind of beat my head against that particular wall until it works. Try a number of things and see, I bet at least one will ultimately, resonate with you. And in my case, actually, what I discovered is, well, there are a few methodologies that all kind of, several of these things work, and the reason why I would choose one over another with a given project was based on the criteria or the spirit of the project, rather than my, just being married to one particular writer's journey. I have found that really successful and helpful. Other people might want to just figure out their thing, but again, you're not going to figure out your thing, I think, unless you try a variety. So then you have the confidence and the clarity that you selected the right one for you.
Of course. No, I love that. And you're definitely the perfect example of that too, because people can see you have so many different endeavors you've taken on. So why not give it a try? So people want to connect with you and learn a little bit more. Where should they head to? Where should they get in touch?
Yeah, well, best place is my website, which is just adamkingl.com. But of course, happy for people to connect with me on LinkedIn as well. And of course, a great way that I connect with people offline is if they want to read my books. I would love that. But very happy with people to read more about me. And I have all kinds of media, videos, all my podcasts, et cetera, are on my website.
Awesome. So there we go, guys. We're going to put the links in the description box of this podcast today. So click on over and get in touch. Adam, this has been such an engaging conversation, and it's clear that you take your passions and you turn it into projects and you share it with the world. And clearly, you know it's been a success so far. And I wish you the best with the upcoming publication. Everybody, if you're interested, click on those links, get in touch, and stay up to date. It's been a pleasure, Adam. Thanks for coming on.
It's been my pleasure too. Thank you so much.
Of course. And to our audience, that's the end of our show for today. Keep checking out new episodes of the Authors on Mission podcast. And until next time, keep writing, keep leading, and keep inspiring. Have a great day, everybody. That's a wrap on another episode of the Authority on Demand podcast. If today's conversation sparked something in you, don't keep it to yourself. Share this episode with a founder or leader who's ready to stop being the best kept secret in their industry. If you want to turn your expertise into inbound demand, head to authorityondemand.com to see how we help clients go from unknown to in demand. I'm Danielle Hutchinson, and I'll catch you on the next one. Now, go build some authority.